We are in John 5. Last week Malcolm talked about the healing at the pool, where Jesus walks up to a guy and he's like, do you want to be healed? And he's been there for many years. And Jesus going, do you want to be healed? Which is a strange question. And then and Jesus heals him. He doesn't have to get in the pool to be healed. Jesus just heals him where he's at. Another example of this sort of comparison between Jesus as the revelation of who God is and some of the Greco-Roman pagan gods that were worshipped at the time. I'm picking up from kind of straight after that incident and some of the reaction to it, particularly by the religious leaders. For all of you who are tracking kind of where we are in John, John 1 was really key, particularly that opening hymn. Like all the themes of John are kind of woven into this opening hymn of the first 18 verses of John chapter 1. But then we've kind of done John chapter 1 through to chapter 4, and all the key themes have been introduced in a fuller way across John chapter 1 to chapter 4. Now, chapter 5 through to the Holy Week, really, through to Jesus' conversation with his disciples. Chapter 5 onwards now, what we see is this kind of examination of those claims, the reaction to their claims, quite a violent reaction to those claims, to those themes that are established in John chapter 1, and then chapter 1 through 4, all those themes have been established. Now we see the kind of the examination of them, the pulling apart of them, the what does it actually mean to believe these? And so, and that's what's happening here. So we're starting verse 9. I've entitled this week Pitstops and Partnering, just to add a little bit of intrigue, see if we can figure that out as we go through. So, but if you like Formula One, then this might be your morning. Anyway, so the day on which this healing that we've just heard about took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is a Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat," because Jesus had said to him, "Take up your mat and walk." So the guy replies, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" In parentheses, "What am I supposed to do?" So they asked him, "Well, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" Sort of comedic element to this conversation. The man who was healed had no idea who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." Intriguing. The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "Look, my Father's always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Jesus gave them this answer: "Very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed." It then goes on a bit. I haven't got time to get into the rest of the next bits, but if anyone ever wants to talk to me about what comes in the following verses, do come to me. But we touch a little bit on the dead coming back to life, the whole idea of resurrection. We touch a little bit on glory and what does it mean around glory, but we're not going to get into that this morning. We're going to focus on this. Part of it. So, the day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." They had taken this comes from the Old Testament law, comes from the Ten Commandments, that you shall not work on the Sabbath. And they kind of extrapolated this out. They'd taken this idea on of not working on the Sabbath, this command that was actually given to the Israelites as a command to go rest. Like, you've been in slavery for for 430 years. Have a day off. Like, that's what the whole command of the Sabbath was that. You've been working for 430 years, have a day off. Like, rest, learn to rest. Because even God rests when he created the earth in 7 or 6 days and then rested on the seventh. Like, part of being human is to rest. Don't just drive yourself 7 days a week without stop. Spend some time in the presence of God. Have a day off. Find a rhythm. This command was about liberation from the persecution of slavery. A people who had been persecuted and oppressed. And God was saying, no, let me help you rehumanize. Let me help you rediscover who you are. Take a day off. But the Israelites had taken this and they kind of extrapolated out going, we need to make sure we don't upset God by breaking this law. So you can walk this distance, but no further. You can't even prepare the food you are to eat. So you have to prepare the food you're going to eat on the Sabbath the day before, because no one's allowed to prepare food, because that would be work. We see another example where the disciples are walking through a field and they pick the heads of grain. And the Pharisees come to Jesus going, they're working, they're harvesting on the Sabbath. No, they're out for a walk and they've just picked up a couple of heads of grain. But the Pharisees are kind of going, no, you've broken the rules, because this rule that was about liberation has now become about oppression. And so the Sabbath was a big thing for them. So this guy, they've kind of missed the point. Jesus has walked up to this guy who for 38 years has been able to do nothing. And they've gone, actually, I see you carrying your mat. You're not allowed to do that on the Sabbath. He goes, I've not been able to do that for 38 years. I don't need a day off. I've been doing nothing for 38 years. Now I can carry my mat. Give me a break. Don't tell me Jesus healed me on the wrong day. 38 years. They've missed the point of the law, right? They've become so obsessed by the law, they've missed the point of the law. Do we do that sometimes? So obsessed by the judging and what people ought to be doing, what they ought to not be doing, that sometimes we miss the point, the grace, the liberation that is offered in Jesus. But they're upset about the Sabbath. That's basically the theme here. So, this Sabbath is a problem. But the man had no idea who it was that had healed him. Jesus had just slipped off into the crowd, but later Jesus finds him. And he says, I see, you're well again. Stop sinning, something worse may happen. Bit of an awkward interaction there. Is he suggesting that the guy was sick because of his sin? Maybe. That does seem to be the inference. Although we have another situation later in John 9, and there's a guy who's blind, and they're going, who sinned? Him or his parents? Why is he blind? And Jesus is going, nothing to do with that. So we can't read one situation and extrapolate it across every situation. That's not judgment. That's not God's good judgment. That's just us being human and trying to not always be kind. So, but we'll move on because we've got some things to get through. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. And in his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father's always at his work to this very day. I too am working. Which is a strange response, isn't it? Why are you hearing this guy on the Sabbath? He goes, well, my Father's busy to this very day, and so I too am working. This is a very controversial thing for Jesus to say. I don't know if you've ever been in conversations with other people about whether Jesus is God or whatever, and they go, yeah, but Jesus never claims to be the Messiah. Well, he does numerous times, numerous places, but here is one of the most blatant places where he claims to be God. My Father is always at his work to this very day. I too am working. I've done a little paraphrase because it's always fun. My Father's about his business. That means I am too. You might say, my dad's always up to stuff. And so am I. There's this phrase that's going on here where he's saying, my Father, he's claiming to be the Son of God. Right there. He's claiming to be the Son of God, and he's saying God's always working. Even to this day, so I too am working. Now there was this belief, there was this understanding amongst the rabbis in Israel at the time, that whilst God rested in the creation story on the seventh day, God did continue to work even on the Sabbath, because he was the sustainer of life and he was the judge of all. And even if all other aspects of what God did rested on the Sabbath, God continued to sustain life, because babies were born, life came about, and he continued to be the judge of all mankind, because people died and because God held all the balance of all things in his life. So they had this belief that whilst God rested and he commands us to rest, God did actually still work in these capacities. So it's interesting that the capacity of sustaining life or healing people is one thing that Jesus claims here. And if we read on in the passage, he also claims God gives the judgment of all things to me. He claims that these very aspects, these most divine aspects of God, the sustainer of life and the judge of all things, were things that God had attributed to him, given him to carry in his role on earth. This is blasphemy of the highest order to the Israelites. But Jesus is claiming to be God. This is a profound moment. And so they want to kill him. And he goes on to say this: I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. You see, they're upset with Jesus because he's claiming to be God. And then they throw in this phrase, which said he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So they're kind of going, this guy, this is blasphemy, because he's claiming all these attributes of God, but he's declaring himself to be God, and so he's making himself equal to God. And here's a really interesting insight that comes from this. This idea of being equal with God, they are portraying, they are looking at, they are representing through our human sinful eyes. See, they're portraying equality with God as, well, there's God, and then this guy says he's just as good as God, or that he is God, or that he's equal with God in some way, which might make you jump to your mind a bit. I'll get there before you, don't worry. You're all going, oh, no, Philippians 2, right? Philippians 2 says, and we'll find it, we'll skip a couple of slides, who, being in talk about Jesus, and the humility of Jesus, says, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. The whole root of sin. Do you remember we talked about the distortion of the image of God, or what God was like a few weeks ago, as the root of sin? Right back in that story in Genesis, the lie that is told, the offer that is given to Adam and Eve in the garden is, you can be like God. That was the first deception. God doesn't want you to be like him, but if you choose this place, you choose this path, eat this fruit, you can be like God. And you can have knowledge of what is good and evil, what is right and wrong. You can decide for yourselves what is right and wrong. Thank goodness the human race has got over that addiction. We don't do that anymore. But there is this situation, there is this perspective. They're going, equality means independence from. It's where our sin is rooted from. To be equal with God, to be like God, is to be independent from God and be able to do everything God does on our own. But this is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus doesn't consider equality with God as something to be grasped or used to his own benefit. Jesus sees himself as part in relationship with God. This is about unity and intimacy. Father and Son and Holy Spirit working in beautiful unity, beautiful collaboration. And so there is this dynamic relationship that is happening. This isn't about equality and independence. This is about unity and intimacy. So for Jesus, equality isn't the point. It's about unity and intimacy. But the beautiful thing about this is God invites us into that relationship with him. We don't have to be people who want to be like God, independent of God. That is a road to misery and ruin. But God invites us to be with God, filled with the Spirit of God, in partnership with God, in relationship with God, in this dynamic relationship of self-giving love with God, to join in with God in the reconciliation of all things. This is a relationship that we are called into. Right at the core of this passage, it says, "For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does." Love is the root of this. And we are invited to participate as children of God, as co-heirs with Christ. We aren't called, you might remember this slide from a previous talk, we aren't called to just be spectators or consumers of God's kingdom. We are invited to step into the adventure and the mystery. It's not enough to believe in his actions and the stories about him. We need to listen to his voice. We are invited to participate. And if we go back to John chapter 2, Mary says, "Do whatever he tells you to do." But what does this relationship look like? So here's where I want to finish, so you guys can come up if you want. Here's the Formula One bit. When I grew up watching Formula One, it was a bit nuttier than it is today. But they used to go around pretty fast. But they used to go around and say they'd have like 70 laps, but every kind of 25 laps or so, they go swooping into the pits. And they'd change the tyres and they'd put fuel in the car, because they're allowed to do that back then. So they put fuel in the car and they'd change the tyres, and some guy would shout a whole bunch of instructions at the driver or communicate a whole bunch of stuff to him in those few seconds that they had, kind of more than the 3 or 4 seconds they get now, kind of like 20 seconds or that sort of thing that they would, or 30 seconds maybe, that they would be in the pit stops for, and they'd sweep in, and then all this stuff would happen to the car, and like someone would shout a whole bunch of instructions at them, and then they'd be off. And the only other communication, that might happen twice in a race, and the only other communication they would have for the entire race was that someone would hold out a board every now and again as they went past the pits. And it might go, "You're on this lap," or "There's this many laps left," or "Slow down," or this car's behind you," or whatever. They'd be able to give you a snippet of information. But apart from that, the driver was on his own. And I think sometimes we slip into a 1990s Formula One pit stop kind of relationship with God. We're driving, we're off kind of out there on our own, doing our own thing, and we're going really fast and life's really busy. And maybe once a week we might swoop in for a little pit stop and see what God's got to say to us on a Sunday morning. And then we're dashing off again about our life, doing our own thing. It's our life, we're in control. We might remember what God said to us on the Sunday, we might not. We might have a little Bible verse up on our fridge that we've pinned to the fridge that we might see in passing as we're making ourselves a cup of tea or something. And I go, "Oh yeah, there's that." But really, we're kind of on our own, and we're doing this pit stop relationship with God. But technology is an amazing thing. And these days in Formula One, there's no escaping it. They're in your ear the whole time. They've got radio communication. And as you're flying around, you're doing it in partnership with your whole team. And they're talking to you all the time. Watch your left front tyre. This guy's coming up. You need to be careful of this. You're just outside the track boundaries on turn number 9. Just be careful next time, you're going to get a flag. They're giving you information all the time about your fuel consumption, about your tyre usage, about your track limits, about who's around you, what the strategy is. Are we sticking with the same strategy? Are we on strategy B or C or D or E or W or whatever it might end up be at this point because the race has all gone wrong? But it's not like popping in once a week or once a month and just getting a little bit of a burst of intel and then we're off living our lives again. This is second by second, minute by minute, communication, relationship, partnership. These are the lives that we're invited to live. And I wonder if some of us maybe recognize that we've been living a pit stop sort of faith. Maybe that's not how it started off, but maybe that's kind of what it's become. And we're just rushing. And God is kind of someone we might listen to in a crisis or go to if we really need something, or we might throw a prayer up if something's crucial or we're worried about something. But Jesus says, I don't do anything that I don't see the Father doing. And later on in the book of John, he says, I am leaving you my Spirit, and he will remind you of all the things that I have said. And you will go on to do even greater things, which is what Jesus alludes to in this passage. We are invited to be participants with Jesus. We are invited to be participants in this kingdom, but not just to be pit stop Christians who are still in control really, but we just get God when we need it. We're invited to be people who have God in our ear, in our heart, in our soul, every second, every minute, every hour, every day. And God will do even greater things that you will be amazed by. Isn't that a more exciting vision of Christianity? Isn't that a more exciting vision of this faith, this partnership, this life that we're called into? So, as these guys start playing, I would just wonder if we want to reflect on that. It might be that you kind of recognize that pit stop faith that I'm describing, and you want to get back to maybe where you were. You want to get back to that. No, God, I want you to be part of every aspect of my life, every minute, every day. We'd love to pray with you about that. We would love to pray with you about that. But also I feel like there's some people who have never really experienced that filling of the Spirit. The Spirit of God who is in us and through us, with us every second, every minute, every hour, every day. Who enables us, who speaks wisdom into our ears, who speaks life into our souls, who speaks truth into our hearts, who enables us to interact with people, who gives us words of knowledge about people, who gives us the ability to pray healing and life, to be sustainers of life to those who are around us, to be people who are bringing about an active within God's kingdom, not just once on a Sunday from time to time, but every day, wherever we are, living out, as we talk about here at YCC 365, everyone, everywhere, every day, in tune with God, filled by the Spirit, bringing that wherever they are. If that filling of the Spirit is something that you would really love to experience this morning, then we would really love to pray with you. So I'm going to ask if our ministry team can head to the back. And if that's something you'd love to respond to this morning, if you're able to, and if you can find the courage, I'd love you to stand. I'm sure you won't be alone. I'd love you to stand and say, yes, Lord, I want that filling. I want that refilling. I don't want to be a pit stop Christian anymore. I want to be that person who is with you, inspired by you every moment, every day. If that's something you're hungry for, let's stand. Amen. Amen. For those who are standing, if you just start making your way to the back, you're going to have people there to pray with you. If you feel like you've lost your fire a little bit, we'd love to pray with you.